Welcome. Take a deep breath and let your thoughts drift back in time. Tonight we travel far, across the deserts of golden sand, along the winding Nile, to a place where life, love, and mystery danced beneath starlit skies. This is not a lesson. It's not a lecture. It's simply a story. A gentle story about how the people of ancient Egypt loved, desired, and dreamed. So close your eyes if you wish. Let your body rest, and your mind wander, because what you're about to hear is what S3X was really like in ancient Egypt. In the dry heat of the Nile Valley, under the watchful eyes of gods carved into stone, love and desire were never hidden, never shamed. In ancient Egypt, S3X was not just a private act, it was sacred, essential, even cosmic. The Egyptians believed that S3X was part of the divine order, an act that mimicked the gods, restored balance, and helped the universe continue. Their creation myths didn't begin with war or violence, but with desire. One of the earliest stories tells of Adam, the first god, who brought the world into being not with a sword, but with pleasure. Alone, in the vast nothingness, he used his own body to create life. He released the first divine pair, Shu and Tefnut, through a deeply symbolic act of self-love. From them came air, moisture, sky, and earth. This wasn't hidden or made shameful. It was written openly in temple texts, because to the Egyptians, the erotic and the sacred were often the same thing. Many temples celebrated fertility. Offerings were made not only to ask for crops and water, but for good S3X, for pleasure, and for many children. The gods themselves were lovers, fighters, and sometimes unfaithful. Their stories, full of passion, jealousy, seduction, were retold again and again. Hathor, the goddess of love, music, and joy, was one of the most widely worshipped deities. She was often called mistress of S3 Zul pleasure. Her festivals were loud, rhythmic, and sensual, with music, dance, and likely wine. Some even say orgiastic rites were part of her worship, though the historical truth is harder to pin down. But not all desire was divine. Set, the god of chaos, was said to have forced himself on Horus in a power struggle. The myth is graphic, shocking to some modern readers, but for the Egyptians, it told a deeper truth, that dominance and submission, even through S3X, had spiritual consequences. In short, for the ancient Egyptians, S3X wasn't separate from religion, it was religion. From the beginning of time to the daily life of farmers and pharaohs, pleasure was part of the cosmic balance, not something to be hidden. Marriage in ancient Egypt was not always a grand, state-declared affair. There were no formal wedding ceremonies for the average person. No priest, no royal decree, and often, no written contract. A couple simply agreed to live together, and that was often enough. But that doesn't mean it was casual. Quite the opposite. Relationships were taken seriously, and S3X was a natural, accepted part of that union. The most common word for wife was hemet, meaning partner. For husband, SA or S3, often translated as man. But inscriptions sometimes go deeper, referring to a beloved spouse as my sister, my friend, or even the one who makes my heart sing. These weren't biological references, but poetic ones, capturing the intimacy Egyptians valued in a partner. Unlike some ancient cultures, women in Egypt had unusual legal rights. They could own property, divorce, remarry, and in rare cases even propose. In fact, many marriages were based on mutual affection, not arrangement, though among the elite, political alliances certainly played a role. S3X was expected in marriage. It was not just for reproduction but also for pleasure and companionship. We know this not just from poetry and artwork, but from legal cases. In some divorce records, complaints are made about infidelity or withholding affection. A husband or wife could legally walk away if they were mistreated, including being denied their S3 Zul rights. In more practical ways, S3X and fertility were woven into everyday life. Amulets of the god Bes, A dwarf-like deity who protected homes, births, and women in labor, were kept in bedrooms. His image was playful, even obscene, but always protective. Fertility dolls, phallic charms, and erotic images weren't hidden in shame. They were proudly displayed, believed to bring luck. Many couples hoped for children, but family size varied. Contraceptive techniques were known, we'll come to that later, and infertility, while misunderstood, was documented. Still, affection remained a constant. Love poems from the New Kingdom speak in warm, sometimes S3 Zool tones. One poem compares a lover's breath to wine. Another says, "Her voice is more beautiful than song, her body more graceful than a swan." Relationships weren't always ideal, of course. Jealousy existed, so did infidelity. But overall, Egyptians seemed to strive for a balance: affection, desire, and respect. And through it all, S3X remained a natural and welcome part of love. To walk through the art of ancient Egypt is to step into a world both elegant and honest, where love, desire, and the human body were treated with neither shame nor scandal. While much of Egyptian art appears formal, rows of gods, stiff-limbed kings, ceremonial poses, there exists another side, quieter, more intimate one. A world of drawings and writings tucked away in tombs, papyri, and hidden corners. A world where desire was not only shown, it was celebrated. Perhaps the most famous example is the Turin erotic papyrus, discovered in the 19th century. Now fragile and partly torn, it remains one of the oldest known collections of erotic illustrations in the world. It shows couples in various S3 Zool positions, some ordinary, some playful, some exaggerated. The bodies are not perfect. The scenes are not subtle, but they carry a strange humor and familiarity. They show that the Egyptians, even thousands of years ago, had a sense of fun, of boldness, and of curiosity. And yet, for all their frankness, S3 Zoolity wasn't reduced to physicality alone. Egyptians were deeply poetic. In the New Kingdom, especially, love poetry blossomed. These were not dry verses, they were alive with longing. One poem from a young woman speaks softly, "I wish I were your laundryman, so I could wash the clothes that touch your body." Another compares her lover's touch to water on parched land, and speaks of her heart racing when she hears his voice. The lines are gentle, rhythmic, and sensual, meant to be recited aloud under candlelight or while reclining beside someone special. Their gods, too, were deeply tied to themes of fertility and pleasure. You've already met Hathor, goddess of love and joy, often depicted with a sistrum, a musical instrument, and a wide, knowing smile. But there was also Min, god of fertility and harvest. His statues are striking. He is shown standing tall, wrapped in tight linen, holding his erect phallus in one hand and a flail in the other. To modern eyes, it may seem shocking, but to the Egyptians, it was powerful. Min was invoked before planting and harvesting, in rituals meant to ensure abundance, both in crops and in children. In festivals for Min, young men would compete in physical challenges, sometimes running, sometimes carrying heavy loads, to show their strength and vitality. Afterward, offerings were made to honor his fertile power. Even the beetle, the humble scarab, was linked to fertility. Rolling its ball of earth, it became a symbol of the sun's rebirth and of life's endless cycle. It was worn as an amulet, often inscribed with prayers for love, protection, and the creation of new life. So whether carved in stone, whispered in poetry, or painted on papyrus, S3X in ancient Egypt was never just about the act. It was about connection between lovers, between people and gods, and between the body and the divine. In the golden halls of Thebes and the shaded courtyards of Memphis, love among royals did not always follow the heart. It followed power, bloodlines, and the gods. Pharaohs were not just kings, they were seen as divine, descendants of the gods themselves. and to protect that sacred bloodline, they often married within their own family. Brothers married sisters. Fathers married daughters. It was not considered taboo, it was tradition. And while it might seem shocking today, to the Egyptians, it was part of preserving divine essence. One of the most famous examples was Akhenaten, the heretic king who changed Egypt's religion. He ruled alongside his queen, Nefertiti, whose beauty became legendary. But behind the love story, there are hints of other, more hidden relationships. Some historians suggest he may have married one of his daughters, perhaps even two. The evidence is debated, but the suggestion alone shows how different their royal customs were. And then there was Tutankhamun, the boy king. His tomb, discovered in 1922, tells not just of gold and glory, but of deep, strange sadness. DNA testing suggests that his parents were full siblings. He himself married his half-sister. The couple lost two daughters in infancy. Their tiny, mummified remains were buried with him. It is a quiet, haunting reminder that royal incest may have protected a throne, but it could not protect the future. Still, love in the palace was not always cold or arranged. There are signs of affection too. In private letters and inscriptions, pharaohs praised their wives, called them beloved, and mourned them deeply when they died. But forbidden love also had its dangers. In one preserved story, a kind of ancient Egyptian tale, a woman falls in love with a man of lower status. Their affair is secret, hidden behind stone walls. When it is discovered, the consequences are cruel. The man is executed. The woman is married off. Whether it is myth or truth, the message is clear. Love that defies order is dangerous. And for queens and princesses, desire could be especially complicated. Take Hatshepsut, one of Egypt's few female pharaohs. She ruled in male clothing, called herself king, and erased the name of her husband from monuments. Did she have lovers? Did she love at all? The records fall silent. Or consider Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, seductress of Rome, lover of Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Her image was shaped by propaganda, both Roman and modern. But beneath the legend was a woman of intellect, charm, and strategic sexuality. She used her body as one might use an army, to form alliances, preserve her kingdom, and protect her legacy. In the end, love among royals was rarely free. It was weighed against power, politics, and eternity. And yet, even in the palace, hearts beat faster. Eyes met in corridors. Desire, no matter how forbidden, found its way. Even in the age of pyramids and papyrus, the ancient Egyptians had surprisingly advanced ideas about reproduction, fertility, and prevention. S3X was seen as vital, but it was not always about having children. Sometimes it was about pleasure, closeness, or control. They knew, in their own way, how to influence fertility. Medical papyri, especially the Ebers Papyrus and the Kahan Gynecological Papyrus, record recipes and remedies for preventing pregnancy. Some involved herbal mixtures inserted directly into the vagina. These mixtures often included honey, acacia gum, and even crocodile dung. Yes, crocodile dung, likely used for its sticky texture and high acidity, which may have had a mild spermicidal effect. Other recipes used acacia leaves ground with dates and colocynth. Modern research shows acacia actually contains lactic acid, a natural spermicide, suggesting the Egyptians may have known more than we once thought. Infertility, on the other hand, was deeply distressing and often misunderstood. Women were usually blamed when a couple couldn't conceive, though some records mention tests to determine if a woman was fertile. One such test involved placing garlic or onions in the vagina overnight. If the woman could taste it on her breath in the morning, it was believed her womb was open and connected to her mouth. A curious theory, but one that shows how earnestly they sought understanding. There were also spiritual explanations. A barren woman might be seen as cursed or under the influence of angry spirits. To fix this, women would turn to magical amulets, fertility gods, and temple rituals, especially at places sacred to Hathor, Isis, and Bes. Still, not all S3 behavior was accepted. Despite their openness, Egyptians did have clear taboos. Adultery, especially by women, was considered a serious offense. A married woman caught with another man could face social disgrace, divorce, or worse, including mutilation or execution, depending on her status and the ruler of the time. For men, the punishments were more flexible, unless the affair involved someone of noble blood. Homosexuality is mentioned rarely, and often in complex or negative terms. One myth tells of the god Set trying to dominate Horus by force, not out of love, but to humiliate him. In that myth, S3X between males was framed as an act of power and submission, not desire. That doesn't mean homosexuality was broadly criminalized, but it was not openly celebrated either. Other taboos included S3X during menstruation, which was often seen as ritually impure, and S3X in temples unless part of specific fertility rites. Masturbation was viewed differently depending on context. While it could be symbolic, as in the creation myth of Adam, it could also be discouraged in daily life, especially among priests who had to remain pure. And yet, despite these rules, the tone was rarely harsh. There's no overwhelming sense of sin or guilt in their writings. More a concern with balance, purity, and social order. S3X, when practiced respectfully and within bounds, was celebrated. When misused, it was seen as disruptive, not evil but unwise. To the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end, it was a beginning, a passage, a return to the gods and a continuation of life in another realm. They called it the Field of Reeds, a mirror of the Egypt they knew, but eternal, fertile, and free of pain. And in this next world, there was S3X. Yes, not only did Egyptians believe you would eat, drink, farm, and enjoy beauty in the afterlife, they believed you could also make love. For them, S3X was part of what made life joyful. It wasn't left behind at the tomb, crossed over with you. That's why tombs were decorated not just with symbols of power, but of pleasure. Husbands and wives are shown holding hands, embracing, even kissing. Some are shown in reclining positions, intimate, warm, connected. These weren't just displays of affection. They were wishes, eternal prayers for closeness and companionship beyond the grave. In burial texts, we find repeated mentions of fertility, virility, and continuation. A man might wish to have power over his phallus in the next world. A woman might be depicted forever youthful, desirable, clothed in diaphanous linen, ready to walk alongside her beloved for eternity. For royals, this was especially important. The pharaoh, as a divine being, needed to maintain his potency, to father gods, to rise reborn like the sun. In the pyramid texts, which date back over 4,000 years, the king is said to rise in the east with his S3 power intact, joining with goddesses in the sky. There were even funerary spells, incantations read aloud, to ensure that the deceased had full bodily function in the afterlife. Not just sight, hearing, or breath, but fertility. One spell invokes the god Min and asks that the deceased be able to engender children in the west, referring to the land of the dead. But more than the physical, S3X in the afterlife was about connection. It symbolized love continuing beyond the limits of life. A couple separated by death could reunite. A lonely soul could find companionship. Even in the eternal quiet of a tomb, a warm body and a loving gaze might be waiting. This belief also shaped how people lived. They weren't just building love for now, they were building it forever. A loyal spouse, a respectful partner, an affectionate touch. These weren't just romantic acts. They were spiritual ones, investments in an eternal bond. Even single people, widows, and priests hoped for love in the next world. If not with someone they knew, then perhaps with someone waiting in the field of reeds. A soulmate not yet met, a lover crafted by the gods. So while today many cultures leave S3X behind when thinking of death or heaven, the Egyptians did the opposite. They brought it with them, tenderly, respectfully, eternally. As we step back from the temples and tombs, the poems and papyri, a clearer picture begins to emerge. The people of ancient Egypt, with all their gods, rituals, and grandeur, were at heart very much like us. They longed for love. They ached with desire. They whispered sweet words in the dark, made mistakes, took risks, and sometimes simply held hands beneath the stars. S3X for them was not just a physical act. It was sacred and joyful. It was a way to connect with their partners, their gods, and the very rhythm of life itself. It wasn't hidden in shame. It was painted, written, sung about, and buried with honor. They spoke of pleasure with poetry. They embraced the idea that the body could be both divine and earthly, both a tool of reproduction and a source of joy. They created medicines to protect their choices, prayers to enhance desire, and art that celebrated even the boldest of fantasies. Of course, not everything was perfect. Power often overshadowed freedom, especially for women and those outside the royal court. And like every society, they had their rules, fears, and contradictions. But still, there's something refreshing about their view, something deeply human. They didn't treat love and desire as separate from the soul. They treated them as part of a whole life, something to be cherished in youth, in old age, and even after death. So tonight, as you let your thoughts drift over the warm sands of the Nile, remember this. There was once a civilization where S3X was not sinful, where the gods themselves loved and desired, where poems were written for kisses and eternity promised for touch. And maybe, just maybe, there's something in that ancient wisdom worth carrying with us now. And so we leave the land of pyramids and painted tombs, where pharaohs ruled, lovers wrote in poetry, and even the afterlife held the promise of touch. Perhaps their world was not so different from ours. Perhaps in love and longing we've always been the same. Thank you for listening. If you found peace in this journey, consider subscribing for more quiet stories from the past. Until next time, sleep well, and may your dreams be wrapped in linen, warmed by desert winds, and kissed by the stars of ancient Egypt.